In the scorching wastelands of Kepler 442b, where temperatures soar beyond what most sentient species can survive, the Galactic Military Academy's most elite training program was about to witness something that would shatter everything they thought they knew about the newcomers from Earth. The alien cadets had heard whispers about humans, these strange bipedal creatures who claimed to come from a death world. But whispers were just that. Today, under twin suns that could melt steel, they would learn why the galaxy's most hardened warriors spoke of humans in hushed, reverent tones. What they were about to see would haunt their nightmares and redefine their understanding of what it truly means to survive. Because when civilization strips away, when technology fails, and when the universe itself seems bent on destruction, humans don't just endure, they thrive. This is the story of the day the galaxy learned to fear and respect the species that conquered a world trying to kill them every single day of their existence. The twin suns of Kepler 442b beat down mercilessly on the assembled cadets of the Galactic Military Academy's Advanced Survival Program. The temperature gauge on Cadet ZYX's environmental suit read 67 degrees Celsius in the shade, if there had been any shade to speak of. The crystalline being from Arcturus Prime felt his internal cooling systems working overtime just to keep him functional. Around him, representatives from dozens of species huddled in their various protective gear. The Velcrani wore their signature biosuits that regulated their amphibian physiology. The insectoid Threx had deployed their natural carapace shields, which shimmered with heat-deflecting properties evolved over millions of years. Even the hardy Korgan, known throughout the galaxy for their resilience, had activated their personal force fields against the brutal environment. All except one group. Cadet Marcus Chen stood with his fellow human recruits at the edge of the designated survival zone, wearing nothing more than standard military fatigues and boots. No environmental suit. No bioregulator. No force field. Just fabric that seemed impossibly thin against the hellish landscape before them. "Attention, cadets," boomed the voice of Instructor Vorthak, a towering hegemony warrior whose species had conquered 12 star systems before joining the Galactic Alliance. His voice carried across the wasteland through their calm systems, though the humans seemed to be listening just fine without them. "Welcome to Hell Week, Day 1. Your mission is simple: survive 72 hours in the scorched flats with minimal equipment. Your performance will determine who among you has what it takes to lead mixed species units in hostile environments." ZYX glanced nervously at his kit. Water recycler, emergency beacon, portable shelter, ration packs rated for extreme conditions, and a small energy weapon for protection against the native predators. Standard survival gear that had kept countless cadets alive in training exercises across the galaxy. The humans, he noticed with growing confusion, carried simple canvas packs that looked ancient by galactic standards. No visible technology. No sophisticated equipment. Marcus Chen was actually rolling up his sleeves, as if the deadly heat was merely an inconvenience. "The temperature will reach 78 degrees Celsius by midday," Instructor Vorthak continued. "The desert glass formations will create temperatures exceeding 90 degrees in concentrated areas. Water sources are scarce and must be located using your survival skills. Native wildlife includes sand wraiths, thermal scorpions, and glass vipers, all of which consider off-world species a delicacy." Several cadets shifted uncomfortably. ZYX watched his crystalline form refract the brutal sunlight, creating small rainbows on the red sand. The beauty would have been mesmerizing if he wasn't terrified of what lay ahead. "Sir," called out Cadet THYSS, a proud Velcrani whose homeworld was entirely oceanic. "What about the humans? Their equipment appears insufficient." Instructor Vorthak's mandibles clicked in what ZYX had learned was their species' equivalent of amusement. The humans requested permission to use their traditional survival methods. The Academy Council approved this request after reviewing their homeworld survival statistics. Marcus Chen stepped forward slightly, and ZYX noticed something that made his crystalline structure resonate with unease. The human was smiling. Not the nervous grimace of someone facing certain doom, but the confident expression of someone looking forward to a challenge. "Instructor," Chen said, his voice carrying easily across the sand without technological assistance, "permission to address the group?" Vorthak gestured approval. Chen turned to face his fellow cadets, and ZYX saw something in the human's eyes that reminded him of the apex predators from his homeworld's ancient past. "I know this looks crazy to you," Chen began, his gaze sweeping across the assembled aliens. "Where we come from, this would be considered a moderately warm day. Our ancestors didn't just survive environments like this, they thrived in them. We evolved on a planet that spent millions of years trying to kill us, and we became the dominant species anyway." He gestured to the wastelands stretching endlessly before them. "This desert? Earth has deserts where temperatures reach 50 degrees Celsius regularly. We have places where the ground temperature exceeds 70 degrees. We have regions so dry that some areas don't see rain for decades. And humans live there. Work there. Raise families there." The silence that followed was broken only by the whistling of superheated wind across the crystalline formations. "You're exaggerating," said Cadet Korvax, a hegemony warrior like their instructor, his voice distorted by his cooling unit. "No species could survive such conditions without technology." Chen's smile widened, showing teeth that ZYX suddenly realized looked remarkably like those of a carnivore. "Human technology didn't advance faster than our biology by accident, Korvax. We developed tools because we needed them to survive on a world that was actively hostile to life. But our bodies? Our bodies adapted first." He began walking toward the staging area where their individual survival zones had been marked. "Watch and learn, cadets. Today you'll see why humans are the only species in the galaxy that volunteers for assignments on death worlds." The starting horn sounded a low, resonant tone that vibrated through the superheated air. Immediately, the non-human cadets began the careful process of establishing their survival priorities. Shelter first, always shelter. The heat would kill them in hours without proper protection. ZYX activated his emergency shelter deployment, watching as the smart fabric expanded into a reflective dome that would keep his internal temperature stable. Around him, dozens of other cadets were doing the same, creating a small city of protective structures on the edge of the wasteland. The humans did something else entirely. Marcus Chan and his 5 teammates spread out in a loose formation and began jogging directly into the desert. Not walking carefully to conserve energy and avoid overheating. Jogging at a pace that would have been considered brisk on a temperate world with normal atmospheric conditions. "They'll be dead within the hour," muttered Cadet THYSS from inside her bioregulated shelter. "Humans may be tough, but they're not immune to physics." But, as the hours passed, something extraordinary began to unfold. The human team moved across the burning landscape like they belonged there. Through his shelter's observation dome, ZYX watched them navigate the treacherous glass formations with an intuitive understanding that seemed impossible for off-worlders. They didn't seek shelter from the sun. Instead, they used it. Chen's team leader, a woman named Sarah Rodriguez, found a series of reflective crystals and used them to signal to her scattered team members. They were communicating across kilometers of deadly terrain using nothing but reflected sunlight and what appeared to be a complex series of gestures. More unsettling was how they moved. Every other species in the Academy had evolved on worlds with relatively stable environments. Their survival instincts were built around avoiding danger, finding safety, minimizing risk. The humans moved like persistence hunters, covering ground with an efficiency that spoke of millions of years evolving to chase down prey across vast distances. By the time the first alien cadets were venturing out of their shelters for brief resource-gathering missions, the humans had already established a base camp 15 kilometers into the wasteland. ZYX could see them through his binocular enhancement, and what he saw defied everything he understood about survival physiology. They weren't just surviving the heat. They were working in it. Chen appeared to be constructing something using nothing but materials scavenged from the desert itself. Another team member was kneeling beside what looked like a small fire, an impossibility in temperatures that would flash-cook most organic matter. "How?" THYSS whispered over the comm channel. "How are they not dead?" ZYX didn't have an answer. His species had achieved spaceflight through superior technology and crystal-based computing systems. They were logical, efficient, scientifically minded. But logic failed when confronted with the sight of beings who seemed to operate outside the fundamental rules of survival. As the first day wore on, reports began filtering back from the monitoring drones that tracked each cadet's progress. The human team had not only established their base camp but had begun exploring deeper into the wasteland. They were mapping thermal vents, identifying water sources, and cataloging local wildlife with a systematic thoroughness that impressed even the instructors. But it was the incident with the sand wraiths that truly shattered the other cadets' understanding of what humans were capable of. Sand wraiths were apex predators native to Kepler 442b, serpentine creatures the size of shuttlecraft that burrowed through the crystalline sand like water. Their thermal signature perfectly matched the ambient temperature, making them nearly impossible to detect until they struck. Protocol called for immediate retreat to emergency shelters if wraith activity was detected in your area. The monitoring drone footage showed Marcus Chen's encounter with a mature wraith just as the sun was reaching its zenith. The creature erupted from the sand behind him while he was collecting what appeared to be cactus-like plants from a thermal vent grove. 3 meters of muscle and razor-sharp crystalline teeth, moving faster than most species could track. Chen didn't run. He didn't activate an emergency beacon. He didn't even seem particularly surprised. Instead, he turned to face the creature, dropped into a stance that every predatory species in the galaxy would have recognized as a fighting position, and did something that would be talked about in academy circles for generations to come. He smiled. The wraith's attack was a blur of motion, jaws snapping shut where Chen had been standing a split second before. But the human moved like liquid, flowing around the creature's strike with an economy of motion that spoke of reflexes honed by evolution and training. As the wraith's momentum carried it past him, Chen's hands found purchase on the creature's crystalline hide. What happened next would be analyzed frame by xenobiology experts and military tacticians for years afterward. Chen used the wraith's own movement against it, redirecting its momentum in a way that sent the massive predator tumbling across the superheated sand. Before it could recover, he was on it, hands finding pressure points that no off-worlder should have known existed. The struggle lasted less than 30 seconds. When it was over, the sand wraith lay motionless, and Marcus Chen was calmly gathering the plants he had come for, apparently uninjured and barely winded. Impossible, breathed Instructor Vorthak, watching the footage from the command center. He killed an apex predator with his bare hands. In 90-degree heat. After jogging 15 kilometers through a wasteland that should have killed him 3 times over. The implications began sinking in among the watching cadets. These weren't just tough aliens who happened to come from a harsh world. These were beings whose very existence represented a fundamentally different relationship with lethality. They didn't survive hostile environments, they conquered them. As the first day of Hell Week drew to a close, the temperature finally began dropping to merely dangerous levels. The non-human cadets emerged from their shelters to assess their situations, ration their supplies, and plan for the challenges ahead. 20 kilometers away, the human team was sharing a meal around a fire they had built using materials scavenged from the desert itself. Chen was teaching his teammates how to identify edible native plants. Rodriguez was showing them how to navigate by the stars that were becoming visible in the darkening sky. They were laughing. In the most hostile training environment the Galactic Military Academy could devise, on a world designed to test the absolute limits of cadet survival capabilities, the humans were having fun. That night, as ZYX lay in his climate-controlled shelter listening to the alien sounds of a world trying to kill him, he began to understand why the galaxy's most experienced warriors spoke of humans with such mixture of fear and respect. It wasn't just that they came from a death world. It was that they brought that death world with them wherever they went. And, tomorrow, the real test would begin. The second day began before dawn with a sound that chilled every non-human cadet to their core, the hunting call of a thermal scorpion pack. The creatures were the size of ground vehicles, with exoskeletons that could deflect military-grade energy weapons and neurotoxin that could drop a hegemony warrior in seconds. They hunted in coordinated groups, using the pre-dawn darkness to mask their approach. Cadet ZYX's threat detection system screamed alerts as his shelter's sensors picked up the distinctive heat signatures moving through the crystalline formations around the survival zone. Protocol was clear: remain sealed in shelter until the pack moved on. Thermal scorpions rarely attacked fortified positions,
preferring prey they could isolate and overwhelm. But, as ZYX watched his tactical display, his crystalline form began resonating with confusion and terror. The human team wasn't in their shelter. According to the tracking data, they were moving toward the Scorpion pack. "Command, this is Cadet ZYX requesting immediate emergency intervention," he broadcast on the instructor frequency. The human team appears to have suffered equipment malfunction. They're moving directly into a thermal scorpion hunting formation. Instructor Vorthax's response crackled through the comm system. "Negative, Cadet ZYX. The humans are operating within mission parameters. Maintain your position and observe. Sir, with respect, they're going to be slaughtered. Thermal scorpions are classified as extinction-level predators for a reason. Your concern is noted, Cadet. Maintain observation protocols." Through his shelter's enhanced viewing system, ZYX watched the tactical nightmare unfold. 6 thermal scorpions, each weighing approximately 3 tons, had surrounded the human camp in a classic pincer formation. They moved with the coordinated intelligence that had made them the apex predators of a dozen worlds. Their exoskeletons gleamed dully in the pre-dawn light, and their neurotoxin stingers dripped with venom that could liquefy internal organs in minutes. The humans should have been cowering in whatever pitiful shelter they had managed to construct. Instead, they were calmly preparing for battle. Marcus Chen stood at the center of his team's formation, holding what appeared to be a primitive spear he had constructed from scavenged materials. The weapon looked absurd against creatures that could shrug off plasma artillery. Sarah Rodriguez had fashioned some kind of sling from fabric and was loading it with crystalline rocks. The other 4 humans carried similar improvised weapons, sharp sticks, crude clubs, stones tied to pieces of fabric. "They've lost their minds," whispered Cadet THYSS over the cadet communication channel. "The heat has driven them insane. No rational being would face thermal scorpions with primitive weapons." But, as ZYX watched, he began to notice something that made his logical, crystalline mind struggle to process what he was seeing. The humans weren't preparing to fight like any species he had ever observed. They weren't trying to establish defensive positions or create barriers. They weren't even focused on the scorpions themselves. They were studying the terrain. Chen moved through his team like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, pointing to specific formations in the crystalline landscape, gesturing to areas where the superheated sand met solid rock, indicating positions relative to the growing light of dawn. His teammates nodded and spread out, each taking positions that made no tactical sense from a conventional perspective. They weren't positioning themselves to fight the scorpions. They were positioning themselves to use the environment against them. The attack began just as the first rays of sunlight struck the crystal formations around the human camp. The thermal scorpions moved with the devastating efficiency that had earned them their fearsome reputation, their massive claws designed to shred through military-grade armor, their stingers capable of striking with the force of projectile weapons. Chen's team moved like they had been training for this exact scenario their entire lives. Rodriguez launched her first projectile not at the lead scorpion, but at a specific point on a crystal formation 20 meters behind it. The stone struck with precision that would have impressed Academy marksmanship instructors, shattering a structural support that caused a cascade of crystal shards. The collapsing formation created a landslide that caught the rearmost scorpion, trapping it beneath tons of razor-sharp debris. Meanwhile, Chen was doing something that defied every principle of combat engagement that ZYX had ever learned. Instead of keeping distance from the nearest scorpion, he was moving closer to it. Not directly, but in a pattern that seemed random until ZYX realized what the human was doing. He was hurting it. Every move, every feint, every seemingly desperate dodge was actually guiding the massive predator toward a specific location. The scorpion, confident in its superiority, followed what it perceived as easy prey directly into the killing ground. Chen had identified a depression in the sand where thermal vents created a pocket of superheated air that reached over 100 degrees Celsius. The moment the scorpion entered the thermal pocket, something extraordinary happened. Its exoskeleton, designed to regulate temperature in the normal range of desert conditions, began to malfunction. The creature's internal systems, evolved to handle the standard extremes of its hunting grounds, couldn't cope with the localized temperature spike that Chen had led it into. As the scorpion began showing signs of thermal stress, Chen struck. Not with the primitive spear ZYX had expected, but with his bare hands. The human grabbed the creature's stinger, the part of its anatomy that every Academy survival manual warned was instantly lethal to touch, and used it as a leverage point to flip the massive predator onto its back. ZYX's mind struggled to process what he was witnessing. Chen had just grabbed a neurotoxin-dripping stinger that could kill him with the slightest scratch, and used it as a tool to manipulate a 3-ton apex predator. The physics alone should have been impossible. The courage required was beyond anything the crystalline being could comprehend. But the most terrifying part was yet to come. With the scorpion helplessly overturned in the thermal pocket, unable to right itself due to its overheating systems and the unstable footing, Chen began what could only be described as a systematic dismantling. Using nothing but his knowledge of anatomy and leverage points that no off-worlder should have known existed, he disabled the creature's ability to fight while keeping it alive. The other humans had engaged their targets with similar impossible effectiveness. Rodriguez had used her sling to target the optical sensors of her scorpion, blinding it before leading it into a crystalline maze where its size became a disadvantage. Two team members worked together to collapse another thermal vent, creating a sinkhole that swallowed their target whole. The remaining scorpions found themselves facing creatures that seemed to understand their weaknesses better than they understood themselves. Within 20 minutes of the first attack, 6 thermal scorpions, apex predators that had terrorized this region for millions of years, lay defeated. Not dead, ZYX realized with growing horror. Defeated. Disabled. Rendered harmless by beings who had taken their most lethal advantages and turned them into vulnerabilities. Impossible, breathed Instructor Vorthak over the command channel. Thermal scorpions have never been defeated by a ground team without heavy weapons. Never. The statistical probability of survival against even a single adult specimen is less than 12% for a fully equipped Academy squad. Chen wiped sweat from his forehead, apparently the only sign that the battle had required any effort at all, and began examining the disabled scorpions. But he wasn't studying them like a victor examining his conquered enemies. He was studying them like a scientist gathering data. Rodriguez, check the neural cluster configuration on specimen 3, he called to his teammate. The toxin delivery system is different from the Earth-based analogs we studied. Already on it, she replied, carefully probing the creature's anatomy with a tool she had improvised from scavenged materials. Looks like the venom production is tied to their thermal regulation. Overheating disrupts the entire toxin production cycle. They were taking notes. After defeating 6 of the deadliest predators in known space using nothing but improvised weapons and tactical knowledge, they were calmly conducting a scientific analysis of their opponent's biology. The implications hit ZYX like a physical blow. This wasn't just about humans being tough or resilient. This was about a species that had evolved to be persistence predators on a scale that no other known lifeform had achieved. They didn't just survive hostile environments, they studied them, understood them, and ultimately mastered them. As the sun climbed higher and the temperature began its relentless climb toward the day's peak, Chen's team was already moving deeper into the wasteland. They had harvested materials from the scorpions, not for trophies, but for tools. Chitin became cutting implements. Venom sacs became chemical reagents. Even the creature's sensory organs were carefully preserved for purposes that the watching aliens could only guess at. Sir, Cadet Korvax's voice came over the comm system, tight with something that might have been fear. Request permission to withdraw from the exercise. My equipment is functioning at critical levels, and the human team has just neutralized every major threat in a 20-kilometer radius. Continued participation seems inadvisable. Other voices joined in. THYSS reported that her bioregulation systems were approaching failure. A Threx cadet announced that his carapace was developing stress fractures from the thermal expansion. Even some of the hardier species were beginning to acknowledge that the environment was pushing them beyond their limits. But it was Cadet Zirian, a proud warrior from the Terminus colonies, who voiced what they were all thinking. Instructor, what exactly are we supposed to learn from this exercise? The humans have just demonstrated capabilities that no other species in the galaxy possesses. They're not following any known survival protocols. They're not using any recognizable equipment. They're operating according to principles that our xenobiology texts don't even acknowledge as possible.
Instructor Vorthak's response carried a weight that suggested deeper knowledge than any cadet had suspected.
You are learning why the Galactic Council voted unanimously to fast-track human integration into the Alliance military structure. You are learning why every major military power in the galaxy has requested human advisors for hostile world operations. You are learning why the ancient progenitor ruins on 17 different worlds all contain warnings about the persistence hunters from the third world of a yellow star. The silence that followed was profound. Ancient progenitor ruins were archaeological sites millions of years old, left by a species that had disappeared long before any current galactic civilization had achieved spaceflight. If they contained references to humans, it suggested implications that no one was prepared to consider. The progenitors knew about Earth?
ZYX asked, his voice barely above a whisper.
The progenitors feared Earth, Vorthak corrected. Every translation of their warnings describes the same thing: a species that turns hostile environments into home territories. A species that treats apex predators as puzzle to be solved. A species that doesn't just adapt to death worlds, they carry the essence of death worlds with them wherever they go. As if summoned by the conversation, Chen's voice crackled over the emergency communication channel, the frequency reserved for genuine survival crises. Academy Command, this is Human Team Leader Chen. We've reached the coordinates for the primary challenge zone. Requesting confirmation that all monitoring equipment is functioning properly. You're going to want detailed records of what happens next.
Confirmed, Team Leader Chen.
All systems operational.
What is your status?
We've located the source of the thermal anomalies in Grid 77. It's not a natural phenomenon as briefed.
Sir, we found something that changes everything about this exercise. Chen's next words sent a chill through every listening cadet that had nothing to do with their climate control systems.
We've found evidence of active progenitor technology. And it's been waiting for us. The discovery of active progenitor technology should have triggered immediate emergency protocols.
Academy Command should have evacuated all personnel and called in specialized archaeological teams with proper containment equipment. Progenitor artifacts were legendary for their power and infamous for their unpredictability. Ancient warnings spoke of entire star systems that had been accidentally destroyed by explorers who mishandled their technology. Instead, Instructor Vorthak found himself watching in fascination as Marcus Chen's team approached the anomaly with the same methodical confidence they had shown against the thermal scorpions. The structure was partially buried beneath millions of years of crystalline sand accumulation, but its basic shape was unmistakable, a perfect geometric form that hurt to look at directly, as if it existed in more dimensions than the eye could process. Heat signatures indicated internal activity far beyond what the local thermal vents could account for. Most disturbing of all, the artifact was clearly responding to the human's presence, its surface patterns shifting and rearranging as they drew closer. Command, be advised that the progenitor structure appears to be communicating, Chen reported, his voice carrying the kind of careful calm that suggested he was working very hard to suppress excitement.
The mathematical progressions on its surface are changing in response to our approach. It's showing us prime numbers, then Fibonacci sequences, then what looks like molecular diagrams. Through the monitoring drones, Cadet ZYX watched the impossible scene unfold.
The human team was studying an artifact created by beings so advanced that their technology was indistinguishable from magic, and they were treating it like an interesting puzzle to be solved rather than a catastrophically dangerous relic to be avoided. Chen, maintain safe distance and await arrival of containment specialists, Instructor Vorthak ordered, though his voice carried little conviction. Everyone monitoring the situation understood that safe distance was a meaningless concept when dealing with progenitor technology.
Sir, with respect, I don't think distance is the issue here, Rodriguez interjected. The artifact isn't just responding to our presence, it's responding to us specifically.
The mathematical sequences it's showing correspond to human number systems.
The molecular diagrams match human biochemistry. It's like it was designed to interface with our species.
The implications of that statement sent shock waves through the monitoring station. If the progenitors had designed technology specifically to interface with humans millions of years before humanity had even evolved intelligence, it suggested a level of temporal manipulation that violated every known law of physics.
Impossible, muttered Cadet Zirian over the comm channel. The progenitors disappeared 65 million years ago. Humans didn't achieve spaceflight until 50 years ago. The timeline doesn't work.
Chen's laugh carried clearly over the communication system, not the manic giggle of someone losing their sanity, but the delighted chuckle of someone who had just figured out the answer to a particularly challenging problem. Unless they didn't disappear, he said, approaching the artifact with the kind of confidence that suggested he had suddenly understood something fundamental about the situation.
Unless they were never aliens at all.
He reached out and placed his bare hand on the surface of the progenitor structure. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Energy cascaded across the artifact's surface in patterns that resembled neural networks. The temperature around the structure dropped precipitously, creating a zone of comfortable atmosphere in the middle of the brutal desert. Most alarming of all, the structure began to speak not through any communication device, but directly into the minds of everyone monitoring the situation.
Welcome home, children of Terra.
You have passed the first trial. *ZYX felt his crystalline matrix resonate with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible. The voice was speaking directly to his consciousness in concepts that transcended language barriers. Around him, he could hear other cadets crying out in terror or confusion as their minds were touched by something vast and ancient. But the humans showed no sign of distress. They were listening with the focused attention of students receiving important instruction. Your species has demonstrated the persistence and adaptability that we bred into your ancestors.
You have proven yourselves worthy of the next revelation bred into our ancestors?
Rodriguez asked, apparently comfortable carrying on a conversation with an ancient alien intelligence.
You're saying you had a hand in human evolution?
We were never aliens to your world, young hunter.
We were your world's first children, the species that arose during Terra's adolescence when the planet's hostility was at its peak.
We survived by becoming the ultimate persistence predators, but we knew that our time was limited. The great extinction that claimed the dominant reptiles would claim us as well. Instructor Vorthak was frantically trying to establish communication with Academy Command, but all signals were being dampened by the energy field surrounding the progenitor artifact. They were cut off, alone with a revelation that was rewriting everything they thought they knew about galactic history. So we chose a different path.
We encoded our essence into the genetic structure of the small mammals that would inherit Terra. We became you.
Every human carries within their DNA the accumulated wisdom of a species that conquered a death world 65 million years ago. Shen nodded as if this revelation made perfect sense. That's why we're the only species that volunteers for death world assignments.
That's why we can survive in environments that kill everything else. We're not just from a death world, we are the death world, made manifest in biological form.
Precisely, young scholar. Your species carries within itself the distilled survival wisdom of Terra's most challenging epoch. But that was only the first phase of our plan. The artifact pulsed with renewed energy, and new patterns began appearing on its surface, star charts that showed the current galactic civilization in perfect detail. We scattered artifacts across the galaxy, waiting for the day when our inheritors would achieve spaceflight and encounter other species.
This desert trial was designed to demonstrate your capabilities to potential allies.
The galaxy needs what you carry within you. What do you mean? Asked one of the other human team members, a quiet specialist named David Park who had spent most of the exercise methodically cataloging the desert's ecosystem. You have noticed that the other species struggle with adaptation. They achieve technological advancement by specializing their environments to match their biological needs. They are powerful within their domains but vulnerable outside them.
You do the opposite, you adapt yourselves to match any environment you encounter.
This makes you the perfect bridge species. Through the monitoring drones, ZYX watched the human team absorbing this information with the same calm competence they had shown throughout the exercise. They weren't panicking about the cosmic implications or the responsibility being placed on their species. They were asking practical questions about implementation.
What do you need us to do? Chen asked. continue being what you are. Integrate with galactic civilization as planned. Share your adaptive techniques with other species, but, more importantly, serve as the vanguard for expansion into regions of space that others cannot survive. The galaxy is vast, and most of it is hostile to advanced life. You are the key to unlocking its full potential. The artifact's energy began to diminish, and the comfortable temperature zone around it started to fade. The brutal heat of the desert reasserted itself, though the humans seemed unaffected. This communication has been recorded in the monitoring systems of your Academy observers. They will carry word of this revelation back to their respective civilizations. Your integration into galactic society will proceed more smoothly now that they understand what you represent. Wait, Rodriguez called out as the artifact began to go dormant. How many other sites like this are there? How many other tests? Every major military training facility in the galaxy has been built near a site of progenitor ruins. Every species that achieves military alliance status must eventually face the realization of what humans represent. This desert trial was designed specifically to reveal your capabilities to the Academy's observer cadets. They will return to their homeworlds with stories that will spread throughout galactic civilization. The artifact fell silent, its surface returning to the inert patterns that had puzzled archaeologists for millennia. The progenitor structure settled back into the sand, once again appearing to be nothing more than an ancient relic of a vanished civilization. But the humans knew better now. They understood their heritage and their purpose in the galactic community. Chen turned to address the monitoring drones directly, knowing that dozens of alien cadets were watching through their feeds. I guess you all have some interesting reports to write when you get home, he said, his smile carrying a new weight of understanding. Don't worry, we're not going to suddenly start conquering the galaxy. We've got bigger plans than that. He gestured toward the stars that were becoming visible in the darkening sky. The galaxy is full of worlds that nobody can live on. Planets with crushing gravity, toxic atmospheres, extreme radiation levels. Worlds that could support massive populations if only someone could survive there long enough to build the infrastructure. That's what we're for. We're not just another military species, we're the species that makes impossible worlds possible. Rodriguez nodded, adding her own perspective. Every species we've met has incredible capabilities within their specializations. The Velcroni can process information underwater that would be impossible for land-based minds. The Threx can coordinate massive construction projects through hive mind techniques that human individualism could never match. Crystalline beings like ZYX can perform computational analysis that our brains can't even approach. But put any of them on a death world, and they need massive technological support just to survive, Chen continued. Put us on a death world, and we build cities. That's not a threat to galactic civilization, that's a gift. We're offering to turn the most hostile regions of space into livable territory for everyone. As night fell over the scorched flats, the temperature finally dropped to levels that allowed the non-human cadets to safely venture outside their shelters. But the brief respite from the heat did nothing to diminish the impact of what they had witnessed. Cadet ZYX stood in the sand outside his shelter, looking up at the stars and trying to process the revelations of the past few hours. Everything he thought he knew about galactic history had been turned upside down. The humans weren't just another species that had achieved spaceflight, they were the inheritors of the most ancient and successful civilization the galaxy had ever known. ZYX. Chen's voice came from behind him, and the crystalline being turned to see the human approaching with two other members of his team. They moved through the darkness with the easy confidence of creatures who had evolved to be active predators during the dangerous hours when other species sought shelter. I wanted to thank you, Chen continued, stopping just close enough for normal conversation. Your monitoring and reporting helped make today a success. I don't understand, ZYX replied, his voice resonating with confused harmonics. How can you thank me for witnessing your revelation? I feel like I should be terrified of what your species represents. Chen's expression grew serious. That's exactly why I'm thanking you. You could have let fear drive your reactions. Instead, you've been observing and learning. That's going to make all the difference when you return to your homeworld and report what you've seen. Rodriguez stepped forward, her tone gentle but firm. We need partners, not subjects. The galaxy is enormous, and even humans can't survive everywhere.
We need the crystalline collective's computational abilities to map the hostile regions. We need Velcroni bioadaptation techniques for aquatic worlds.
We need Threx coordination capabilities for large-scale construction projects.
What we're offering, Chen concluded, is a partnership where each species contributes their greatest strengths to a project bigger than any of us could accomplish alone. Earth gave us the ability to survive anywhere, but surviving isn't the same as thriving.
For that, we need everyone else.
ZYX looked up at the alien stars, then, back at the humans who had redefined his understanding of what was possible.
When we return to our homeworlds, what should we tell our people about what we've seen?
The truth, Chen said simply.
That humans are persistence predators who carry the survival wisdom of a death world in their genetic code. That we can survive in environments that would kill anyone else.
That we see hostile worlds as puzzles to be solved rather than obstacles to be avoided. He paused, looking out across the desert that had been their testing ground. But also tell them that we remember what it was like to be alone on a dangerous world. We remember what it was like to look up at the stars and wonder if there was anyone else out there. We know what it means to survive against impossible odds. Rodriguez added, and tell them that we're offering to make sure no species has to face impossible odds alone ever again.
The galaxy is dangerous, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Together, we can make it livable for everyone.
As the night deepened and the alien cadets contemplated their return journeys to their respective homeworlds, each carrying stories that would reshape their civilization's understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy, the human team settled down for a few hours of rest. Tomorrow would bring the final day of Hell Week, and, with it, challenges that would test everything they had learned about survival, adaptation, and the true meaning of persistence hunting on a cosmic scale. The final day of Hell Week began with an emergency that no training manual had prepared them for. Just before dawn, Academy Command received a distress signal from a commercial transport vessel that had suffered catastrophic engine failure in orbit above Kepler 442b. The ship was carrying a mixed crew of 37 beings from 12 different species, and it was caught in a deteriorating orbit that would bring it crashing into the scorched flats within 6 hours. Under normal circumstances, this would trigger immediate evacuation of all training personnel and deployment of specialized rescue teams with heavy equipment. But the orbital mechanics of Kepler 442b created a unique problem. The planet's magnetic field fluctuations made it impossible to maintain stable communications with rescue vessels during certain parts of its rotation cycle. The next rescue window wouldn't open for 8 hours. The transport would impact in 6. Instructor Vorthak stood in the command center, staring at tactical displays that showed 37 souls heading toward certain death while the galaxy's most advanced rescue team sat helplessly in orbit, unable to penetrate the magnetic interference. Around him, Academy staff frantically worked through scenarios, all of which led to the same conclusion: there was no technological solution that could reach the crash site in time. "Sir," Cadet ZYX's voice crackled over the communication system. "Request permission to volunteer for emergency rescue operations." The request was echoed by voices across the cadet frequency. THYSS is Zirian, Corvex, and dozens of other Academy trainees offered to assist in whatever way they could. Their courage was admirable, but Vorthak knew that sending cadets with limited survival equipment into the impact zone would only increase the casualty count. "Negative on cadet deployment," he replied. "The crash site will be a thermal hell that will exceed all survival equipment parameters. We cannot risk additional casualties in an unwinnable situation." Chen's voice cut through the desperate chatter with calm authority. "Command, this is Human Team Leader Chen. We can reach the crash site." Vorthak felt his mandibles click involuntarily. "Chen, your team is already 25 kilometers into the deepest part of the scorched flats. The projected impact site is another 30 kilometers beyond your current position, in a region where surface temperatures will exceed 100 degrees Celsius after the crash. No being can survive those conditions. Sir, with respect, you've spent the last 3 days watching us survive conditions that should have been impossible. We can cover 30 kilometers in the available time, and we can operate in post-impact thermal conditions that would incapacitate other species." Rodriguez's voice joined the communication. "Command, we've been studying the local geology for 3 days. We know how to navigate the thermal vent systems and crystal formations.
More importantly, we understand how to use the environment's hostility as a tool rather than fighting against it. Vorthak looked at his tactical displays, running calculations that made no sense from any conventional perspective.
The human team was proposing to cover 55 kilometers of the most hostile terrain on the planet, reach a crash site that would be radiating lethal amounts of heat, and somehow extract survivors from what would essentially be a furnace powered by ship fuel and superheated metal.
It was impossible by every standard metric. It was also the only chance those 37 beings had.
Chen, be advised that you will be operating beyond all possible support range. If your team suffers casualties, we cannot extract you until the next communication window opens.
You would be completely on your own.
Understood, sir.
We're not asking for extraction capability.
We're asking for permission to do what we were designed to do. The weight of that phrase settled over the command center.
Designed to do.
Not trained to do, or equipped to do, but designed by evolution, by 65 million years of genetic refinement, by the accumulated survival wisdom of the progenitors themselves.
Permission granted, Vorthak said quietly. Godspeed, Team Leader Chen.
The human team moved out immediately, abandoning their careful exploration pattern in favor of a direct sprint toward the projected impact coordinates.
Through the monitoring drones, ZYX watched them navigate the crystalline maze with a speed and efficiency that defied belief.
They weren't just running through hostile terrain, they were reading it like a map, understanding its flows and patterns in ways that spoke of deep evolutionary connection to dangerous environments. Chen led the formation, his movements flowing like water around obstacles that would have stopped other species entirely. Behind him, Rodriguez and Park worked together to mark the safest path through the thermal vents, their improvised tools allowing them to test ground stability and temperature gradients at a pace that kept up with their leader's relentless advance. The other 3 team members, Lopez, Kim, and Singh, spread out in a reconnaissance pattern that covered maximum ground while maintaining communication through the primitive but effective signaling system they had developed over the past 3 days. They moved like a pack of persistence hunters closing in on prey, every motion coordinated through instincts that transcended individual training. As they advanced deeper into the scorched flats, the temperature began climbing toward levels that would challenge even their remarkable physiology. The morning sun struck the crystal formations with increasing intensity, creating localized zones where the ambient temperature reached levels that could cause instant dehydration in unprepared beings.
But the humans adapted.
ZYX watched in fascination as they began modifying their movement patterns to take advantage of the shade provided by larger crystal formations, timing their sprints across exposed areas to coincide with temporary cloud cover, and using their understanding of thermal dynamics to predict which routes would offer the most survivable microenvironments.
Command, this is Chen. We've reached the preliminary impact zone.
Adjusting course based on updated trajectory calculations.
The transport ship was visible now as a bright point of light in the dawn sky, its deteriorating orbit bringing it inexorably toward the planet's surface.
Spectral analysis indicated that it would impact with enough force to create a crater 50 meters across and generate temperatures exceeding 150 degrees Celsius for several kilometers in all directions. No rescue team in galactic history had ever attempted to operate in such conditions.
Chen, be advised that impact is now projected in 43 minutes. Post-impact thermal bloom will make the area uninhabitable for at least 4 hours by all known survival metrics. Copy that, Command. We're implementing heat adaptation protocols. Heat adaptation protocols.
Vorthak wondered what those words meant to a species that had evolved on a world where heat adaptation meant the difference between life and death for millions of generations. Through the drone feeds, he got his answer. The human team was systematically preparing their bodies for conditions that would kill any other known species. They were using techniques that seemed to blend ancient knowledge with sophisticated understanding of human physiology, controlled breathing exercises that modified their blood chemistry, movement patterns that optimized circulation for heat dissipation, and mental preparation techniques that allowed them to consciously alter their perception of pain and discomfort. Most remarkably, they were shedding equipment. Everything that might retain heat or restrict movement was being discarded in favor of the absolute minimum necessary for survival. They were preparing to meet the rescue challenge in the most elemental way possible, with nothing but their evolved capabilities and their determination to save lives.
Impact in 15 minutes, announced the Academy tracking station. All personnel maintain safe distance from projected thermal zone.
The human team was not maintaining safe distance. They were positioning themselves at the edge of the impact area, close enough to reach survivors immediately after the crash but far enough away to avoid being killed by the initial explosion.
It was a calculation that required perfect understanding of thermal propagation, debris patterns, and crash dynamics. It was also completely insane by any rational standard.
The transport ship screamed through the atmosphere like a falling star, its hull glowing white-hot from atmospheric friction. When it impacted, the explosion lit up the dawn sky like a small sun, sending shockwaves across the desert that shattered crystal formations for kilometers in every direction. The thermal bloom that followed turned the crash site into a hellscape that defied description.
Temperatures spiked to levels that would have vaporized most organic matter instantly.
The very air itself seemed to catch fire as superheated gases from the ship's fuel systems ignited in a chain reaction that created a localized inferno. Through it all, the monitoring drones tracked 6 human figures moving steadily toward the center of destruction.
They weren't just surviving the impossible heat, they were working in it.
Chen's team moved through the thermal hell like beings who belonged there, using their understanding of airflow patterns and thermal dynamics to navigate paths that offered fractional degrees of relative safety.
Command, this is Chen. We've reached the wreckage. Beginning survivor extraction. The next 4 hours became the stuff of legends that would be told throughout galactic civilization for generations to come.
Working in temperatures that exceeded the melting point of most metals, the human team systematically extracted 37 survivors from the twisted remains of the transport ship.
They didn't just carry the survivors to safety, they kept them alive during the extraction.
Using nothing but improvised tools and their understanding of alien physiology, they provided emergency medical care that stabilized beings whose species they had never encountered before, in conditions that would have killed the survivors instantly if they had regained consciousness. Rodriguez demonstrated an intuitive understanding of Velcroni bioregulation that allowed her to keep an injured amphibian crew member alive by creating a makeshift humidity chamber using salvaged materials and her own body heat. Park used his knowledge of crystalline biology to repair stress fractures in a Threx Cadets exoskeleton that would have been fatal if left untreated. Lopez and Kim worked together to construct a cooling system for a hegemony warrior whose natural armor was conducting dangerous amounts of heat into his internal organs. Most remarkably, Chen and Singh managed to jury-rig a life support system for a being from a species none of them had ever seen before, a crystalline entity similar to ZYX but with completely different atmospheric requirements. Using nothing but wreckage from the crashed ship and their understanding of basic physics, they created a survival environment that kept the alien alive until proper medical teams could reach the site.
Command, this is Chen. Survivor extraction complete. 37 beings accounted for, all stable for transport.
Requesting medical teams at Coordinates Sierra 77 as soon as the communication window opens. Instructor Vorthak stared at his status board in silence.
6 humans had just accomplished what an entire fleet of rescue vessels with advanced technology couldn't have achieved.
They had operated for 4 hours in conditions that should have killed them in minutes, performed complex medical procedures on species they had never studied, and saved every single life aboard the crashed transport. But, perhaps most importantly, they had done it while 36 alien cadets watched through drone feeds, recording every moment of impossible heroism for transmission to their respective homeworlds.
Chen, this is Command. Outstanding work. Medical teams are standing by for immediate deployment once communication window opens in approximately 30 minutes. What is your team's status? Minor heat stress, some dehydration, but nothing that won't resolve with rest and rehydration.
We're establishing a casualty care area and maintaining life support for the survivors until proper medical teams arrive. The casual tone in Chen's voice suggested that the human team considered their accomplishment to be routine rather than miraculous. They had faced an impossible rescue situation and solved it using the same methodical competence they had shown throughout the entire training exercise. As rescue teams finally reached the crash site and began proper medical treatment for the survivors, word of the human team's achievement spread through the Academy's communication networks. Within hours, reports were being transmitted to military commands across the galaxy, carrying detailed accounts of what 6 humans had accomplished in the heart of a thermal hell. But, for Cadet ZYX, watching the evacuation procedures through his drone feed while still trapped in his survival shelter by the ongoing heat, the most profound moment came when one of the rescued survivors regained consciousness. The being was a Velcrani engineer who had suffered severe injuries in the crash. As the medical team worked to stabilize her condition, she looked around at the hellish landscape and the humans who had saved her life. "How?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the medical equipment. "How did you survive in this? How did you reach us?" Marcus Chan, sitting beside her makeshift medical station despite the fact that the ambient temperature was still lethal to most species, simply smiled with the quiet confidence that ZYX had come to recognize as fundamentally human. "We come from a world that spent 65 million years trying to kill us," he said gently. "We learned a long time ago that impossible conditions are just another kind of puzzle to solve. And we never leave anyone behind." The Velcrani engineer stared at him for a long moment, then closed her eyes and whispered something in her native language that the universal translator rendered as, "The persistence hunters are real. The ancient stories were true." As the final day of Hell Week drew to a close and rescue operations concluded successfully, the alien cadets found themselves returning to their shuttle with stories that would reshape galactic civilization's understanding of what humans represented. They had witnessed the birth of a legend that would define humanity's role in the galaxy for generations to come. 6 months later, Cadet ZYX stood before the Crystalline Collective's High Council, delivering a report that would fundamentally alter his species' relationship with the broader galaxy. The council chamber's geometric perfection reflected and amplified his words as he described the events of Hell Week, each detail carefully preserved in his crystalline memory matrix. The humans accomplished in 3 days what our most optimistic projections suggested would require decades of technological development and massive resource investment, he concluded. They didn't just survive in conditions that should have been impossible, they thrived in them. More importantly, they used those impossible conditions to save 37 lives that would have been lost under any other circumstances. The silence that followed was filled with harmonics of deep consideration as the council processed the implications of his report. Finally, Counselor Prime Zirian spoke, his ancient voice resonating with frequencies that touched the quantum foundations of crystalline consciousness. "You are asking us to believe that a single species has inherited the accumulated survival wisdom of the progenitors themselves. That they represent not just another technological civilization, but the biological embodiment of persistence hunting elevated to a cosmic scale. I am reporting what I observed, Counselor Prime. The humans demonstrated capabilities that our theoretical models cannot explain through conventional evolutionary processes. Their integration into galactic civilization represents an opportunity for expansion into regions of space that we have considered permanently uninhabitable." Across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place in the highest levels of every major civilization. The reports from Hell Week had spread through diplomatic channels, military intelligence networks, and academic institutions with the kind of rapid dissemination reserved for information that changed everything. On Velcros Prime, the Amphibian Homeworld's Council of Depths was reviewing detailed analyses of human bioadaptation techniques. The rescue footage showed humans operating in thermal conditions that would have flash-cooked Velcrani physiology in seconds, yet maintaining cognitive function sufficient for complex medical procedures on injured alien species. "The implications for joint operations on hostile worlds are staggering," reported Admiral THYSS, who had parlayed her Hell Week experience into a fast-track promotion to the Velcrani Deep Space Command. "A single human team can establish forward operating bases on worlds where our most advanced environmental suits would fail within hours. They don't need technological support, they are technological support." In the war chambers of the hegemony terminus colonies, military strategists were grappling with reports that challenged their fundamental understanding of tactical operations. General Korvax, formerly Cadet Korvax, addressed the assembled commanders with the weight of someone who had witnessed the impossible firsthand. We have based our military doctrine on the assumption that hostile environments are obstacles to be overcome through superior technology and overwhelming force, he said, his warrior's frame casting sharp shadows in the chamber's harsh lighting. The humans have demonstrated that hostile environments can become tactical advantages for species adapted to exploit them.
They don't fight against death worlds, they weaponize them.
But it was on Earth itself that the most profound changes were taking place. The revelations about progenitor heritage had transformed humanity's understanding of their own nature and their role in the cosmic community. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, promoted to lead the new Department of Xenosurvival Studies at the Galactic Academy, stood before a joint assembly of Earth's governments and explained the implications of their species' true origin. We are not just another technological species that happened to evolve on a harsh world, she said, addressing leaders who were still struggling to comprehend the scope of what had been revealed.
We are the inheritors of the galaxy's first successful death world civilization, carrying genetic modifications that represent millions of years of survival optimization.
Every human alive today is a living repository of techniques for surviving and thriving in conditions that would destroy other forms of life.
The political implications were staggering.
Overnight, humanity had gone from being newest members of galactic civilization to being recognized as the inheritors of its oldest and most successful survival traditions. The other species weren't just accepting human integration, they were actively requesting it. Marcus Chen, now Director of Human Integration Services, found himself coordinating with dozens of alien civilizations eager to establish joint operations for exploring previously uninhabitable star systems. The requests came from every corner of galactic space: mining consortiums that wanted to access mineral-rich worlds with crushing gravity, research teams planning to study phenomena in radiation-soaked systems, terraforming projects that required initial surveys of planets with toxic atmospheres. The galaxy is enormous, he explained to a gathering of Earth's most senior diplomatic and military officials. Most estimates suggest that less than 3% of potentially habitable worlds are actually inhabited by advanced species. The rest are too hostile for conventional colonization, too hot, too cold, too radioactive, too gravitationally extreme.
But we can live there. We can build there.
We can turn those death worlds into homeworlds, not just for humans, but for mixed species communities that bring together the best capabilities of every civilization. The transformation was already beginning. Joint human-alien teams were being deployed to previously impossible locations, with humans serving as the vanguard that established basic infrastructure while their partners contributed specialized technologies and expertise.
Crystalline beings like ZYX provided computational support that allowed precise environmental analysis.
Velcroni bioadaptation specialists helped design life support systems for other species.
Threx coordination abilities managed complex construction projects that span entire continents.
But the most significant change was cultural.
The reports from Hell Week had fundamentally altered how other species viewed humanity's place in galactic civilization.
Humans were no longer seen as inexperienced newcomers who needed to be carefully integrated into existing systems. They were recognized as the solution to expansion challenges that had limited galactic civilization for millennia. 6 months after the events on Kepler 442b, the first joint colony ship departed for the Omega Centauri system, carrying a mixed crew to establish humanity's first official Death World colony. The target planet was a hellscape of volcanic activity and toxic atmosphere that had defeated 3 previous colonization attempts by conventional means. The human team, led by veterans of various Academy survival programs, would establish the initial base camp and begin the long process of making the world livable for other species. It was dangerous work that would likely cost lives, but it was also the kind of challenge that humanity had been unknowingly preparing for since their ancestors first learned to hunt across the savannas of Africa. Cadet ZYX, now Lieutenant ZYX and assigned as the mission's primary computational specialist, stood on the colony ship's observation deck watching the target planet grow larger through the viewport. Beside him, Marcus Chen reviewed final preparations with the calm confidence that had become his trademark.
"Nervous?"
Chen asked, noticing the subtle harmonics that indicated crystalline anxiety.
Concerned, ZYX replied honestly.
The environmental parameters are beyond anything we attempted during Academy training. Surface temperatures that fluctuate between -40 and +60 degrees Celsius.
Atmospheric pressure that varies by 30% depending on volcanic activity. Toxic gas concentrations that would require full environmental suits for every species except humans. Chen nodded, understanding the legitimate nature of ZYX's concerns. It's going to be challenging. We'll probably lose equipment, definitely face situations we haven't trained for, and almost certainly discover problems that our advanced planning didn't anticipate. He paused, watching the angry red glow of the planet's volcanic activity painting aurora patterns across its upper atmosphere. But that's exactly what we're designed for. Humans don't just adapt to hostile environments, we use their hostility as raw material for building something better. Give us a world that's trying to kill us, and we'll figure out how to make it support a thriving civilization. ZYX's crystalline structure resonated with frequencies of deep consideration. The other species are betting their expansion plans on that confidence. If humanity fails to deliver on the promise demonstrated during Hell Week, the consequences for galactic development could be catastrophic. We won't fail, Chen said simply. Not because we're invincible, but because failure isn't an option when people are depending on us. That's what persistence hunting really means. You keep going until you succeed, no matter how long it takes or how impossible it seems. As the colony ship entered the target planet's orbit, automated systems began transmitting detailed environmental data that confirmed everything they had feared. The world below was a nightmare of extremes that would challenge every aspect of human survival capabilities. But, in the ship's common areas, the human crew members were displaying the same calm confidence they had shown on the burning sands of Kepler 442b. They weren't studying the planetary data with the desperate urgency of beings facing a potentially lethal challenge. They were studying it with the focused interest of craftsmen examining the raw materials for their next project. Lieutenant Rodriguez gathered the mixed species advance team for their final briefing before planetary deployment. Representatives from 7 different civilizations sat around the conference table, each equipped with the most advanced survival technology their species could provide. Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished beings, she began, in 6 hours we'll be making orbital insertion into what the Academy's Threat Assessment Division has classified as a Class 5 death world. Everything about this planet will try to kill us, the atmosphere, the weather, the geology, and, probably the local wildlife when we find it. She paused, looking around the table at faces that represented the combined technological achievements of galactic civilization. But, here's what I want you to remember, we're not just trying to survive down there. We're trying to build something that will outlast all of us. We're creating the first multi-species colony on a true death world, proving that the galaxy's expansion isn't limited by the hostility of available planets. Chen stood to add his own perspective. Each of you brings capabilities that humanity alone could never achieve. ZYX's computational abilities will allow us to predict and prepare for environmental changes that would otherwise catch us off guard. Our Velcrani teammates can design bioadaptation systems that will eventually allow permanent colonization. Our Threx partners can coordinate construction projects on a scale that will transform the entire planetary environment. And we, Rodriguez concluded, bring the ability to survive long enough for all of that to matter. Humans will be the ones who establish the initial foothold, who figure out how to live on a world that doesn't want life to exist. But, what we build together will be something greater than any single species could accomplish alone. As the colony ship completed its final orbital preparations, the mixed species crew made their last preparations for what would be remembered as the most ambitious colonization attempt in galactic history. They were about to test whether the promises demonstrated on the burning sands of Kepler 442b could be scaled up to the level of permanent civilization. The human team checked their equipment one final time, not the sophisticated technological systems that other species required, but the simple tools and techniques that had been proven effective across millions of years of evolution. They were preparing to meet the ultimate challenge of their species, not just surviving on a death world, but making it livable for everyone else. As the first shuttles launched toward the planet's surface, carrying teams that represented the combined hopes of multiple civilizations, Marcus Chen took one last look at the tactical displays showing environmental conditions that would have been considered impossible for colonization just 7 months earlier. The readings showed temperatures that fluctuated wildly, atmospheric composition that was actively toxic to most known life forms, and geological instability that made even basic construction a nightmare of engineering challenges. It was exactly the kind of environment that humans had been designed to conquer. The shuttles descended through the planet's turbulent atmosphere like seeds of civilization being planted in soil that had never supported life. Within their protective hulls, representatives of dozens of species prepared to witness the next chapter in humanity's expansion across the galaxy. They were about to discover whether the persistence hunters of Earth could transform a death world into a homeworld, not just for themselves, but for all the species who had come to depend on humanity's unique ability to thrive where others could only survive. The greatest test of human adaptation was about to begin, and, with it, the next phase of galactic civilization's expansion into the infinite hostile beauty of the cosmos.